All right, I think I will get started just so that we don't take up or that we use all of our time that we have with you, Evan. Um, so yeah, I'll just give a brief introduction here. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining the Transect Student Advisory Roundtable Speaker Series presentation. My name is Chloe Canning, and I am a PhD student at the University of Saskatchewan. But today I'm actually joining from Germany, and so if everyone else, while I kind of just briefly introduce the speaker series or just give a little bit more context, and also introduce our speaker for the day, if everyone just wants to put where they're joining from in the chat, that would be wonderful so we can kind of get an idea of where everyone is coming from. And so, yeah, the Start Speaker Series is really an opportunity to share knowledge and gain experiences, and learn from each other from people working in kind of a transdisciplinary space from all around the world. And so, really, our goal is to connect, those of us working in TD with each other so that we can all learn from each other. And today, Evan is our speaker, and I'm really excited to hear about all of his experiences and kind of more of the private sector than we've had before in the speaker series. So, just a brief introduction for Evan. He has dedicated his life to environmental stewardship and community development, from launching a windmill project in Tanzania to changing legislation on wilderness conservation. Now executive director of eMerge Guelph Sustainability, he works to advance climate action. Evan has overseen the operation of North America's first urban wind turbine at Toronto's waterfront and has helped community renewable energy projects get started around the province and in Guelph as the chair of the Guelph Renewable Energy Co-op. Evan is also a recipient of the Governor General Canada's 125 Award, and he shares his passion for the outdoors by teaching defensive cycling to high school students and coaches children's cross-country skiing. He's happiest when he's in nature and with the people he loves, which I really enjoy. So Evan's going to give his presentation, and then we will have some time for discussion and questions at the end. So please feel free to leave your questions either in the chat and raise your hand, and I'll make sure to help moderate that discussion. And Evan, it's up to you if you want questions either during your presentation or to wait till the end. But with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you, Chloe. And thank you all for joining us today from far afield. I'd be, I'm more than happy to take questions along the way. Just let me put this into the slideshow side of things. I have to say that even the title of this is one that I've wrestled with, and primarily because this concept is something that that different governments and different industries have played with. That generally the best approach would be to use research-based decision making, whereas many have moved towards decision-based research making, and from that I mean that. Looking to make the research fit the outcome that the policy people are looking to actually do, that may not be with objective peer-reviewed research would suggest out the other end of it. There we go. So the traditional approach, as many of you know, being researchers, is that we do the research, and the evidence that we find from that informs the decision, and ultimately action comes out the other end. Unfortunately, that just isn't happening in that manner from a policy perspective. But I'm sorry, I neglected to say earlier on that Emerge Guelph Sustainability, the organization that I work with, we work locally in the community of Guelph to fight climate change. And the manner in which we do it is two ways. We help people on a personal basis make changes to their life to find climate change. And then we try to move them towards supporting our work in changing policy locally. Our community is about 150,000 people. But what we also do is we engage in policy actions that have a broader impact on the province as a whole. And we're currently in a legal battle with a very large gas company where we have legal standing in a challenge that we're doing in conjunction with the city of going after that organization. So I just wanted to give you context of of where we're coming at coming at all of this from. Um, um, but unfortunately, sometimes research alone falls short. And apologies for the text-heavy slides here. That human decisions are shaped by identity, emotion, convenience, trust, a lot of different things. And institutions inevitably respond to political incentives, economic pressures, and that political incentives, or positive or negative, are becoming more and more influential in that decision-making process. Even when the evidence is clear, systems can resist change in a significant way. And as scientists out there, the environmental community, we have consistently taken the approach that if we give decision makers good research, that they will make good decisions. And unfortunately, that has continued to fall by the wayside in recent years, especially since a significant pushback on climate change. Excuse me. There we go. Powerful economic actors can shape, not only economic but political actors can significantly shape the narratives, the public opinion, the political will. Research will rarely create transformation in and of itself. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's happening less often right now, especially in the area of climate change. We need to somehow connect that research with people in a manner that they can understand, and that ultimately leads them to move to action. Yeah, and then there's the misinformation that I'm sure many of you have seen it out there in the fields that you're working in. And obviously, social media has had a profound impact on amplifying that. Um, uh, those fossil fuel companies out there that are pushing back understood the risks decades ago. Public campaigns have created doubt about climate science, messaging emphasizing uncertainty, personal responsibility, economic fear. All of these tactics have been somewhat overwhelming, to say the least. But what I want to introduce you to is perhaps a term that you haven't heard of before, FUD, um, and what it stands for is a concept called fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And this was a communications approach that a communications company um, developed in the 1950s and then perfected in the 1960s, specifically to battle the science related to proving that there's a direct connection between cigarette smoking and cancer. And that was a company called Hill and Knowlton. Arguably, it has 14,000 employees all over the world, and it's one of the best communications companies out there because their clients are extremely happy with what happens at the other end. So they not only started this, but they created this model that's used right to today: fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I don't need to change your mind. I need to put enough fear, uncertainty, and doubt in your mind that the status quo is just fine. So why should we change? Um, the timeline, surprisingly enough, this was so I know I just talked about this, the cigarette companies, but starting in the 70s, Imperial Oil did a very large study on climate change, and they understood it very clearly from that point. At which point, and at the time, they spent a lot of time burying the data that they received. In the 1990s and 2000, yes, some of the public doubt campaigns, there was significant lobbying efforts. However, in the environmental community here in Canada, what we noticed over the last 4 years was a massive increase in misinformation that went out there. And ultimately, and this is very well documented, was an organization that was formed called the Pathways Alliance. And it was a conglomerate of fossil fuel companies, very large fossil fuel companies in across Canada. Very nice name, Pathways. Who doesn't like pathways or alliances? Those are really nice things to have. But their goal was to spend an awful lot of money in obfuscating and confusing the public on climate action. Um, but I'd also like to say that climate inaction is not only a scientific problem, but it's at this point, it's become an incredible information and power problem. Um, from a behavioral economic standpoint, people don't always act rationally. And this one always surprises me. They fear losses more than future gains. They prefer convenient default options, and they follow social norms and group behavior. Short-term comfort outweighs that long-term risk. But let me use an example, a couple of examples here. You might say, what on earth do swimming pools and pickup trucks have to do with anything that we're talking about today? There's an element in society that can obviously afford to build their own swimming pools in their backyards, granted a very privileged one. But if someone in that economic zone does that and invites some friends over, they're probably going to enjoy the swimming pool. They're probably going to ask them, some of the technical things about it, but more importantly, they're going to start enjoying that swimming pool already. Um, by the same token, they wouldn't go and ask how much it cost, and more importantly, they wouldn't ask specifically. What's your payback? Um, our sense of being rational about decisions like things like this. I mean, why do people put in a swimming pool? Because they want to enjoy it. They want their family to enjoy it, etc. But it's not a rational thought from the standpoint from an economic perspective, because at least in Canada, fewer than 50% of households want a swimming pool in the backyard. And some real estate agents would suggest that it could actually be a detriment to selling the home. By the same token, pickup trucks. Where's the rational thought when someone buys a pickup truck that will use as much as 3 times the energy, and you have to spend 3 times the amount of money on gasoline or diesel in order to operate them? Someone buys a new pickup truck, and I hate to say it, but in Canada, the data is showing that 80% of all new vehicle sales are very large pickup trucks, SUVs, and vans. And they significantly use a awful lot more energy than other gas-powered vehicles. But would someone that bought a new oversized vehicle, be asked what's the payback on it? And yet, when it comes to renewables, if those same households were putting solar panels on their roof, spending a significant amount of money, needless to say, maybe not as much as a swimming pool, but still put it in, or buying an EV. And it's not infrequent that one of the first questions that people ask is, "What's your payback?" It's indicative of a lot and I won't go down the list of 20 other issues that people have with EVs, and these issues aren't issues from the standpoint that it's a learning process. There's a learning curve that people have to go through on these things. These are memes essentially that have been repeated and repeated by those that don't see an interest in having the electrification of the transportation systems. So where we need to go with things is effective climate policy. It must make sustainable behavior easier, more visible, socially rewarding, economically practical. The economically practical one, the wonderful thing that's happening right now is that, and I'm sure that many of you have seen some of the data, is that renewables like wind and solar have now reached a point at which they are significantly less expensive than new gas-fired electricity generation, new nuclear generation, and new coal generation. So that economic thing is flipped. The other exciting thing that's happening with that from an economic perspective is that it's also flipping in developing countries. And the continents of Africa and much of Asia and India specifically are seeing huge growth in solar because of the economic side of it. And in many developing countries, that jump from that happened with telephones from wired systems to cell phones without having to be connected by wires. A similar thing is happening when it comes to solar. So that economical piece is flipping, and it's flipping. I mean, it's been a cost has been dropping exponentially for years, but it's now at a point where it's something that they can't avoid. They can't ignore anymore. So the goal isn't to inform people, but to shape environments that encourage action. From a strategic communication standpoint, we want to be able to create meaning, trust, and motivation. Um, and those messages need to speak to people's lived experiences, their values, and different audiences respond to different motivations. The same communication piece isn't gonna work for someone that is only concerned with health or affordability or resilience or opportunity or, for that fact, national security. And in many cases, it may be difficult to make that climate communication piece that fits these. But there are elements that continue to go down that path. Um, where are we? And here's the other one: trusted messengers really matter. Um, the piece of this that's really concerning for me is that in recent years, scientists and academics, that trust in them has started to become eroded, not to any great extent, but the fact that it's being eroded at all is very troubling in my mind. And I'm sure it's in all of your minds, being people that are obviously researchers um, and academics. So trusted messengers matter. We know that there is a lot of misinformation out there about science, but also about those messengers. We still need to ensure that we've got those messengers out there. Um, and those stories need to move people effectively, and stories move people much more than statistics. I'll give you an example of one that we just did recently. That one of the things that we do that I mentioned earlier is that we help people make changes to their homes and their personal lives as it relates to climate change. And we had an open house. We had over 220 people in one day in a house here in Guelph. And we had done all the data. I could recite the data and the amount of GHG emission reductions and the gigajoule reductions. I could convert it to cubic meters of gas and all the stats. And that's what I started with. And then it dawned on me, one of the things that I hadn't done for that house was calculate the savings in energy use. And the savings in energy use per year was $4,000 a year. And somehow I seem to think that I was going to motivate people by explaining to them, even those that are environmentally motivated don't have a personal connection with what those GHG emissions amounted to. In this case, it was significant, quite significant, but tons of GHG emissions, needless to say, doesn't regularly resonate with people. So we need to find a story that's going to resonate with people. Mind you, depending on the group, if it was a group of environmentalists, I would probably only focus on the GHG emissions. And by the way, you can save money on it at the same time. But it also has to counter information and that manufactured doubt, that use of the FUD concept. We need to be strategic about the manner in which we communicate and move people to that engagement piece. And that organized action is much of what we do when we're trying to change policy. Chloe was asking me about my connection with Diego, who I understand that all of you know. So Diego was working with us on a project where we were motivating the city of Guelph to develop something called green development standards. And green development standards are municipalities in our province in Ontario are fighting a provincial government that doesn't want to see better sustainable development or more sustainable development out there. They want to just pave everything. I know that's me editorializing, but municipalities felt that it was important for buildings to be much more energy efficient, for new neighborhoods needed to be more walkable. We needed to look at things on the implications of climate change and flooding, all these different things. And Diego was very instrumental in helping us putting our response and putting significant work into us lobbying the city, and they've approved it. Now we're waiting for the implementation portion of it. It's quite a major move forward, and that kind of stuff only happens when we can get when we can influence politicians and mobilize people on a much broader basis. Rarely does good policy happen at by a single politician. Usually they're motivated by the community in very large numbers in order to make better change out there. And research becomes socially and politically powerful when we get larger communities to organize around it. I will use another example there was that Enbridge was trying to prevent us from having any kind of involvement in this legal battle. And their argument, Enbridge, sorry, this is a very large natural gas company in Canada and in the United States. And their argument was that we don't represent anyone. And the entity that the legal entity we were working with at the time that's adjudicating on it is the Ontario Energy Board. And we asked our supporters, would they, are they interested in us doing this work? And in less than 4 days, we got 500 emails that were sent to the Ontario Energy Board that says Emerge is representing us, and you need to provide them with the opportunity to be interveners in this legal battle. And indeed, we did get that. So that we need to mobilize people around these issues. It's also important that we align the incentives. Political incentives. What's a political incentive? It's a vote. It's media pressure. It's economic interest when it comes to politicians. Market incentives. Obviously, businesses respond to demand, regulation, investment, and signals. And a good example there is the renewables, conservation and efficiency, and electric vehicles, what's happening on market incentives. In some cases, there have been rebates related to renewables and EVs, and they've had a profound impact on helping to advance the electrification of everything, where we need to go from a climate change standpoint. And ultimately, the social incentives, I mean, people feel when they feel that they're doing something that's beneficial, normal, and achievable. And that normal thing is really important. And what we try to do is to use people that have been successful as example, not as someone that is a professional in a field, but average people that are doing extraordinary things on advancing the impacts of mitigating the impacts of climate change. That it can truly help in moving the needle. And ultimately, we need to, this one's a really hard one, reduce the incentives for disinformation. In Canada, the fossil fuel industry receives literally billions and billions of dollars of hidden subsidies. These are huge incentives for them, and it's a really difficult thing for politicians to remove those things once they're in there. In our country, on the lobbyist database that exists at Parliament Hill, the largest group of lobbyists is associated. The total number of lobbyists on that list is the fossil fuel industry, and the second largest group on that list is the nuclear industry. So they have a huge impact on all parties that are operating there, and ultimately there needs to be an increase in transparency and accountability. So let's look at examples of some things here that we need to find examples where there's a story associated with something, and what I put up there is making a climate lemonade at our landfill. I briefly had a conversation with Chloe about this. As society, or rather, one of our things, one of the things that we work very hard on is to increase the amount of renewables that are existing in Guelph. So one of the projects that we've started with a research project in conjunction with the University of Guelph with researchers there is to evaluate and do some pre-feasibility studies of developing our landfill site. So where our waste has gone up until 2003, the landfill site was closed in 2003, build a solar project that would be community owned. And what that means is that people in Guelph will be able to buy investments in increments in as small as $1,000. That's still a lot of money for some people, but it definitely opens up a very broad group of people that could be investing in it. We called it Climate Lemonade because we knew it would put a smile on people's faces, that they wouldn't quite understand what the heck are you talking about. And then one of the other pieces that we're working on, right, very early stages of working on, is getting Indigenous involvement. The last 12 major renewable energy projects that were built in Ontario, in our province, that were just announced a few weeks ago, we had at least 50%, if not greater, Indigenous equity ownership in those projects. So we're trying to find something yeah, it does all the right stuff from an environmental perspective, but what does it do from a storytelling standpoint? What does it do from a societal one? What does it do from the standpoint of reconciliation? Can we integrate these things in it? And I have to tell you that when I pitched this to City Council some time ago at a City Council meeting, what surprised me was that the number of City Councilors on all sides of the political spectrum that were trying to elbow each other in the head to run to the front of this parade. And we don't look into this very often. And when we're successful at it, people say, well, sir, of course you're successful at it. Well, a lot of this was about the messaging, and I think we need to learn from that and continue going down that path. But then there are also examples in practice on the corporate sustainability side of things. There are consumer expectations, investor pressure, can influence corporate behavior. Also, we want to counter misinformation initiatives, fact checking. We know we need to do all these things, but one thing I want to point out to you is that the United Nations has these principles for responsible banking that I believe it was over 140 banks from across the world, including at least a half a dozen of the major banks in Canada, were members of this. That oddly enough, our current prime minister was instrumental in creating these principles and getting banks to sign on to them. And dare I get political for a moment and say that within about 3 weeks of the change at the White House that occurred a year ago in January, every single one of those banks pulled out of that agreement. That was profound. And for it to happen, like in a matter of weeks, every day I'd go to the website to see what banks are left on this thing, and none. I mean, it just more and more from every country in the world that had banks involved with it. So we've lost a lot of ground on these things as well, and that's probably that's indicative of a really difficult one to turn around. So takeaways. Research is fundamental, and I don't need to reiterate that to anyone on this call. But evidence alone rarely creates the transformation, and the human behavior shapes the outcomes. The narrative influences the public action, and incentives like rebates, that type of thing, financial or otherwise, can shape decisions. And the information ecosystem determines whether evidence leads to action. The challenge is no longer simply producing knowledge, it's creating the conditions that make that action possible. So I thank you for this opportunity, and very curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Evan. That was a wonderful presentation. So I'll give a round of applause for
Thank you.
that. Brenda, I saw you had a question that you popped into the chat, so maybe I'll let you go first and ask that.
Sure, thank you. And thanks for the great presentation, Evan. That was right up my alley. I'm very interested in community engagement and feel that probably our most important work around sustainability is to fix democracy. So my question for you, and I love that you closed your presentation by talking about these information ecosystems, but I was wondering about any advice you might have for trying to find overlaps in these information ecosystems. We're at a time when people are so absorbed in their own truth because they have these echo chambers of information within their ecosystem. And so, the one point you made was how, make sure that you're addressing misinformation directly. And I wondered, what's your advice on doing that without inciting some kind of conspiratorial debate? We're all in the trenches.
I know, and I wish I had an easy answer to it. I think on a personal basis, part of where I've landed with that is that just don't get into the arguments with people that clearly it has already become an argument rather than a discussion. That I think we need to find the people we can influence. And unfortunately, by saying that, it runs the risk of being in our own echo chamber. But finding those incentives, finding the things that help politicians make the right decision. And I got to tell you, one of the best advice that I got from a local municipal politician was, he said, Evan, make it easy for me to say yes. So we've got to give them, and part of that is developing the communication for the politicians from the standpoint that they're going to get the pushback. And I think what we need to do for those of us that are trying to move forward on climate action is when there's an issue, you need to map out all the things that the crazies are going to say. Sorry, I editorialized there, but I think that you need to think in those terms, and it won't be hard for you to find what they're going to say. And you need to develop a good strategy on how to mitigate it with the audience that you're looking to target. You're not going to change their minds, but I think making sure that those that would push back would you want as many people as possible to come forward with being supportive of it. And I'll use an example that I was mentioning about this legal battle that we're on. And I won't bore you with the details of it all, but ostensibly they're getting an unfair advantage over all other utilities in our municipality because they pay nothing to use the public right of way to run their infrastructure through. So it's a significant amount of money. It's $7 million in our city, which may not sound like a lot, but when we look at it province-wide, this little old organization in Guelph is fighting this entity. It would be $800 million a year that gas company would have to pay. But here's one of the biggest arguments that friend and foe said to my face when I told them what we're doing. If you push that gas company, all they're going to do is apply to have to raise their rates to cover the additional cost of it. So they would have to raise it throughout Ontario to the tune of $800 million. And here was our response to it, that from our perspective, this is all about affordability. Affordability for the municipality and for the person that's potentially using that gas. And what we said was, when we get that money from the gas company, this is what we're going to do with it. The first tranche of that money, the top of that money is going to be used to deal with energy equity issues for those that can't afford their energy bills. It's going to help just with all out cash to help them get down that path. More importantly, to invest in efficiency, conservation, and renewables in those people's homes, whether they're rentals or not, to make sure that their bill is as low as possible. Then the next tranche is for the broader, a larger group of the population in our community that have homes with more rebates, more loans, for all of them to reduce their total energy bill. So we want to use the money that they haven't been paying us to actually get people in Guelph to be able to lower their bills, because it really surprised me, one after another, friend or foe, because sometimes your friends want to ask the hard questions, and you need to remember those friends, and you know who they are, and make sure when you're test the messaging with them and see what they come back with, and you'll get and I think we need to make sure that we form the right form it for the audience. Needless to say, you're probably familiar with Catherine Hayo. Are you familiar with that name? Catherine, okay, yeah. Well, and for those of you that may not be aware of her, she's a climate scientist, and she's a Canadian, but she's at a university in Texas, and she specializes specifically on climate communication. And what I found remarkable in chatting with Catherine about this was that she's in pickup truck, gun rack country. And, when she was going into communities or even into a bar and talking to people in that area, she talks to them about hunting and about the fact that some of the people that she's meeting are concerned with what's happening with hunting. The number of specific species they're trying to hunt is going down. And needless to say, she's able to draw that. She knows the science in the immediate area very well and is able to bring it in. That's a really long answer to your question, but I think it's important for us to understand their arguments and have good rebuttals for them, or more importantly, turn it into a positive. Because if all we're doing is we need to, don't wait for them to bring the issue up. You're producing a press release on a report that you've just done, then dispel it as you go. And let me use the case of the higher gas bills, that what we're in the early stages of doing is doing some outreach around that, where we're going to start pushing politicians, going into a municipal politician to say, this is what you need to do with that money when we get it. This is how you need to do it. As opposed to waiting for it publicly for people to punch us in the face and say that this is just going to raise my gas bill. Hope that wasn't too long of an answer.
No, it was great. And I loved your suggestion of pilot testing these narratives and the case that we're building with some friendly foes. So that's really good. Thank you.
Does anyone else have a question for Evan?
Yes, I do. Yeah, thank you very much, Evans, for the presentation. It was so great. Yeah, while you were introducing the part of your presentation, you mentioned a fascinating idea, which is like one of the common thing, which is of course very common across countries. Like you said it that many of the populace, or let me say the masses, the community follows social norms and group behavior, right? So basically, I mean, I just finished from a policy class, and one of the things I discussed there was this issue of this small p and the big P, right? Where the small p are those informal policies and norms that guides the distance, which we have found to have been sustainable, right, in many of those communities. So I want to understand from your perspective, what's the role you think this, I mean, informal policies, or let me say the informal laws and rules and the norms that guides those group, especially when you talk about the indigenous communities, especially with those that we're working with, like the Métis and these indigenous people, they have their own informal policies. What's the role it plays in driving these climate change efforts that we're driving at, and how do you think we can kind of balance both the small p and the big P? That's
And
just
small p and big P, you mean the small p political and the capital P political is what you're talking about.
Policy, yeah. Small, I mean the informal policies, like the norms that guides, I mean, set of rules that are set by the communities themselves, right? And against the big P, which is the one set by the stakeholders, the government, and all of those things. Because you mentioned that one of the common thing we see is that they follow social norms and group behavior. So I just reflect on how do we leverage on this particular one, like the small P, which is what they are used to and what they know, to drive what we have at the larger, kind of like a skill question. That's always been my interest to hear from other perspectives.
Yeah, I hear it a bit as a chicken and an egg question. What came first? And inevitably, I think our aggravation with the small piece stuff that we're dealing with on a daily basis leads to the big piece stuff. And I'll use an example with a campaign that I led on changing our Provincial Parks Act, and this was moving it away from development to entrenching ecological integrity in that act. And so how we did it, so that was the big goal. That was the really big goal that we had. And we thought, if we go around to the public, most people couldn't spell. I shouldn't say this, but I mean, people didn't understand what the concept of ecological integrity was. Our constituents did at the time. Our constituency within the realm of the environmental movement and the people that were supportive of us. But we needed to make it clear to people what it was fixing. So it's great to have this wonderful goal, but what on earth is it fixing? Wait, ecology exists. What's your problem, Evan? This doesn't make any sense. So what we did was we traveled throughout the province. It's a very big province, and we worked with local groups that were fighting the province on specific inappropriate things that were being done in all of those different provincial parks around the province. So, and changing the act so that ecological integrity was the prime objective, that's where we wanted to get to. But we didn't start with talking about that. What we talked about was a mining company dumping liquid mine drainage into a provincial park. That's pretty obvious. The other thing was invasive species that certain vehicles were bringing in because these ATVs shouldn't have been in those places because their wheels brought in the seeds that brought in invasive species, et cetera, with it. There were numerous different things that what we used them for was in the local media. It was a bottom-up approach that we worked with those local groups to say, okay, we need to get in your local media. And then those groups would talk to their members of parliament or members of provincial parliament. And slowly it would be a bottom up. And at the same time, we were working at it from the top down, from the standpoint that we were also lobbying the minister. We were lobbying the premier. So I think it's critical that you've got to have sort of a top down and a bottom up approach to this. At times it works if it's completely bottom up, but you need to find those champions. Sometimes it's hard to find those champions in the party in power. In a parliamentary democracy, sometimes we have no choice but to go to to one of the other parties to be supportive and get somewhere. But I will say this Parks Act, it got to a point, I'm still giddy about this. We finished it in 2007. We had all party support. It was unanimous in the legislature. It took us 7 years to get there. But we got ecological integrity as the prime piece of that was there. And oddly enough, a lawyer that was working for us and I wrote a model act and gave it to the province. And we couldn't stop laughing at the end of the day because they plagiarized large amounts of it. And that's exactly what we wanted them to do. But it was that bottom-up approach that really, I think, it made sense for someone that, for a member of parliament that was literally 1,500 kilometers away from Toronto, from where where the legislature was. So I think you need to be strategic about finding what are you fixing and how does that help that politician get somewhere.
Awesome.
Thank you,
Uh,
Evans. Thank you.
yeah. Does anyone else have a question? I do have one. Because you talked a little bit about, because yeah, a lot of us here would be or are researchers, or moving into that field. And you mentioned briefly that, you're working with University of Guelph and potentially other universities as well. And I'm wondering if you have any examples of researchers communicating really poorly to learn from, but also communicating really well to learn from. And if you have any examples of that and things we could learn from.
Well, let me ask you this. All of you probably had absolutely brilliant, brilliant professors that couldn't communicate.
Mhm.
I see a smile on your face. I think we've all been in that situation, right? And um, um, it's a hard thing when someone all their life is focused on being is absolutely um, 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 focused on being this expert and is an expert in that field and tends to speak with other experts and being able to communicate that in a manner that the average public can understand is a really difficult thing to do. I wish I can remember the name of the academic that during that whole time when we were working on the Parks Act, there was an academic from a university, Trent University, for those of you that may know it. It's outside of Toronto, and he had a forestry. His area of expertise was in forestry, but he switched so that everything that he was talking about was about communicating and environmental initiatives in a more positive way. And yeah, as I said, I wish I can remember his name. Or the other academic would be Catherine Hayo. It's Hayoe. And Catherine was also, she was very generous with her time with us. And oddly enough, she joined in the midst of the pandemic. She joined us. We had about over 80 people on a call with her. And I say she was very generous with her time because a few hours earlier, she was on a call with the American Medical Association with 1,000 physicians from around the United States communicating about how to communicate on the environment. She's also was a recipient of the Times Top 100 Influencers because of her work on climate communication. So that Hayoe, Catherine, I think would be a really good example to. She's written an awful lot on it, and she speaks on it all the time on communicating climate in a more positive way. For those of you in Canada too, there's an organization called ReClimate, RE.climate, and if you just Google that, you'll find it right away. This is a brilliant group of academics from across the country. And what they do is in-depth research into climate communications for specifically Canadian-based. They do public opinion polling, but they also aggregate public opinion polling. And then they analyze that and assist all of us in how to communicate and how to dispel fears of things. So taking a very academic approach to something that they understand needs to be palatable for the broader community out there. So those two things, those two I would strongly recommend. And the academics involved with ReClimate, it would be good for you to connect with them. It won't be difficult for you to find out who they are based on that.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Does anyone else have a question for Evan? I guess, Evan, do you have any questions for us as well? Knowing a little bit, but
Well, I'd be curious what all of you, the research that all of you are doing. Chloe, we had that conversation earlier, but of the others that are on the call, I'd be very interested in hearing what people are doing.
Mhm. If anyone, yeah, go ahead, jump in.
Sure, I'll jump into the murky waters. So I'm a PhD candidate working on a concept called regenerative organizing. And I'm working with biosphere regions in Canada particularly. And they are sites designated by UNESCO and are working on sustainable development. But sustainable development often creates these trade-offs between conservation and development. And what regenerative organizing is about is a framework to try and hold those tensions together, to engage broadly across diverse perspectives in order to get to and instead of or.
Mhm. Yeah, that's wonderful. That's what. Which biosphere reserves, or is it just multiple that you're involved
Yeah, I actually just finished a scan of all 19 here in
in?
Canada,
Gotcha. Yeah.
looking at their initiatives, and I'll be doing case studies. I have 2 confirmed right now, the Georgian Bay and Clayoquot
Okay.
Biosphere Trust, and I'm working on a third. Hopefully it's Waterton, but they haven't said yes yet. So
Oh, Waterton would be fantastic. That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Does anyone else want to share their research?
Okay, I can go. Yeah. So yeah, I'm Tolu Lokwe by name. I'm a PhD student. It's second year. No, okay, third year now. I finished second year already. So I'm a third year PhD student in Pennsylvania State University here in the US. My research is around the human natural resources management. So basically, my research is around water degradation. That is my focus area. My unit of analysis is the Chesapeake Bay. So my interest is around looking at the human dimensions of putting some practices on the farm to ensure conservation practices. So basically, my interest specifically is on modeling the part cognitive structure, like systems thinking, play in driving adoption. So many of the researches has always been around behavioral sciences, looking at those, theory of plant behavior, division of innovations theory. But at this time, I want to see how to model in systems thinking and see what the cognitive part of what the farmers or producers thinks about gives them, influence to put those practices like riparian buffers, stream bank fencing, and cover crops on their farm. The end goal of everything is to see how the Chesapeake Bay can meet the TMDL limit that was set by the government, which has, of course, it was 2025, but still now Pennsylvania and even other states are struggling to meet it. So that's basically what my research is around, to see what are the things that influence it, both socio-psychological factors and cognitive factors, and to see how those things place together. Yeah.
Wow, that's an issue all over the world. Dealing with farming practices and waterways. That's fantastic. In Chesapeake Bay, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Let's see, Parmir Singh saying, I'm working on understanding the evolution of transdisciplinary research and international research team. Another project exploring biosphere regions. Experiences with transdisciplinary education, collaborating activities, a case study with the Transdisciplinary International Learning Program. I'm sorry I can't speak in a public place. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Parmir.
If anyone else wants to share, now is your chance. If not, we are actually just about at time. So I just want to say thank you one more time to Evan for this presentation and this discussion. Yes. Round of applause for him. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your perspectives and some of the things that you've learned. I think we can definitely take a lot from it. And yeah, thank you to everyone on the call as well for sharing today. That's a nice way to get to know your community as well. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone.
And best of luck with your research, all of you. You're doing important work.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Bye
Okay,
bye.
have a
Have a good
great
day.
great rest of your day, you guys.
Thanks, and you too.
Thanks.